When it comes to US policy towards Syria under Donald Trump's administration, we may be for complete shock. The president-elect has already declared that he's going to completely depart from most of the Barack Obama's administration's foreign policy's imperatives, emphasizing on his idea of reapproachment with Russia, agreeing with President Putin that strengthening Assad is better than leaving Syria vulnerable to rebel control or being taken over by Iran. As a matter of fact, President Putin and President-elect Donald Trump have already spoken on the phone about the regulating conflict in Syria and possible cooperation. It seems that President Trump is keen to forge the new beginning in the US-Russian relations, even at the expense of Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, or any other partners of the USA. But before we will go into this matter any further, let us go back to Barack Obama administration for a moment. As we remember, President Obama has publicly and openly supported the Syrian opposition on many occasions ever since the beginning of the Syrian uprising. And once his administration has assumed that President Bashar al-Assad's days are numbered, President Obama has publicly declared Bashar al-Assad public enemy number one. But with the US president that was not willing to do anything to bring this aspiration to life, even after the Ghouta chemical attacks, the Syrian regime has started regaining its position in the country. The biggest problem with Barack Obama administration was not the fact that it actually didn't send troops to Syria or that it didn't send more military equipment to Syria, to Syrian rebels to fight the Bashar al-Assad regime, or that it did not support diplomatically the rebels, but the very fact that Barack Obama has given the Syrian people an aspiration, a shimmer of hope that he actually will do something about Syria. And Syrian rebels ended up very much mistaken, because despite of the countless declarations that al-Assad must go and that his government has crossed yet another red line, Barack Obama administration had no intention to do anything to make this happen. It was not even the fact that he was against military interventions, especially on humanitarian grounds. As a matter of fact, he was ready to go into Syria after the Ghouta attacks. It's just that he must have realized that he has no winning strategy or tactics which will actually make it happen for Syria. And relatively changing the government at that stage would mean that Syria would be in huge disarray, especially when it comes to chemical weapons. And he basically decided to side on the side of caution. What he didn't know was the fact that basically within the next couple of months, al-Baghdadi with his ISIS will show up in Syria and Iraq and will completely change the structure of power in the region, and he would have to intervene anyway. So basically he had to reluctantly order the US coalition to come back to Iraq and strike in Syria. As you can see in this map, the situation was rapidly deteriorating, with Islamists killing many innocent civilians. And the very fact that Obama was not decisive enough shown a clear message to the Kremlin. And Russia, with President Vladimir Putin, have long sensed this insecurity. And in September 2013, Russia stepped in its military presence in Syria to prop up the Syrian regime. Of course, initially, the Russian diplomats claimed that they are acting on government's request and intervene in many places across Syria. Well, Russian intervention in Syria basically overshadowed US intervention, with military sorties flying from Latakia, planes which were doing 10,000 up to 15,000 sorties, and strong navy firing long-range rockets from Russian warships in the Caspian Sea, striking both jihadists and moderate rebels. Russia basically shown decisiveness, precision and ruthlessness, something which Washington was lacking. Washington was very much into negotiating, whereas Russia basically took control of the situation on the ground in Syria. So ever since September 2015, we've seen a strike contrast between Russian action and US inaction. And maybe in the process, Russia has actually managed to anger the Turks, Saudis, US, most of European countries, not to mention the vast majority of the Arab world. But somehow, the Russian policymakers' actions in Syria have actually benefited its national interests. Such ruthlessness and such passion to protect the very controversial leader of Syria, Russia was actually showing that its superpower status is still for grabs. And despite of the fact that the whole enterprise must have cost them a little fortune, it somehow made sense simply because this operation was showing Russia as a country which is capable to project its power across continents and across oceans, that is self-confident and capable of undertaking such difficult operations. It was basically a matter of prestige for Russia and for the Kremlin to go to Syria and support the friendly regime, even if this regime is extremely controversial. Because from Russian perspective, it wasn't about helping Assad or helping anyone in this conflict. It was about showing that Russia is back in the game. Unlike his predecessors, who basically contributed to dismantling of the Soviet and Russian power, President Putin is very focused on regaining this power. The problem for outside world is that he actually understands regaining a power in very 19th century categories of territorial gains. His actions in Chechnya, Georgia, Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and now in Syria clearly show that he actually despises both Yeltsin and Gorbachev for dismantling the Soviet Union, in his opinion, the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. Once the US presidential elections of 2016 was underway, the Kremlin has actually managed to move its air carrier, Admiral Kuznetsov, with a number of other warships from Murmansk in the Barents Sea in the north via English Channel to the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to the coast of Syria, where it is waiting to start a major operation to launch massive strikes on Daesh, al-Nusra Front, and all of the other Syrian opposition groups in Aleppo, Idlib, or Homs province. The Admiral Kuznetsov's presence in the Eastern Mediterranean changes the rules of the engagement in this conflict. This air carrier can carry a number of fighter jets and helicopters that could be used against al-Assad enemies. And the question is, to what extent President Trump will allow the Russian counterpart to take control of the situation? Can the USA be just an engaged spectator of the show who retracts in the hour of the worst possible danger and allows Russia to project its strategy in the region? If President Trump will outsource the responsibility of dealing with this conflict fully to Russia, he's ultimately starting to implement his campaign promises of giving up of the US position as the world policeman and enabling regional bullies to reshape the global architecture of power in their favor. And the history teaches us that each time the USA retracts from the world, the consequences for the world and the USA itself can be dreadful. Not only that, according to many political commentators, President-elect's idea of supporting Bashar al-Assad government in his fight against ISIS may have catastrophic consequences, not only for Syria, for the Middle East, but also for USA, because it will turn large proportion of Arab world against American presidents and American people. So President-elect has a very hard nut to crack. On one hand, by engaging with Russia in the strategy of supporting Bashar al-Assad, he is not only jeopardizing the security of Syrian people, but he also jeopardizes the security of the USA in the long run. by ignoring Russia, he needs to come up with better strategy than Barack Obama, because Barack Obama's strategy obviously didn't work. So the question remains whether Donald Trump is capable of coming up with the sound strategy that can resolve the situation in Syria, or whether he will outsource this problem to Russia, and by doing that, he will basically jeopardize the American power in the long run. On behalf of International Relations Daily, it was Piotr Pietrzak. It was a pleasure to talk to you.